Welcome to the Conjugate Nation podcast. I want to see that. I'll definitely try that on the Rhino with the belt squat pull throughs. We haven't done those. Obviously done the regular ones. And then, yeah, that sounds good.
What were you connecting that with, Shane?
So sometimes when you pull throughs, we'll hold on to a rope on a belt squat, or we'll hold on to
like the tri grip rope.
Yes, but this time we just use the belt actually. So we did a max bend tension. So if you get on a belt squat machine and you face away from the stack, go all the way to the edge of the machine, toes on the edge, and then we lean forward just a little bit. And so when you're all the way locked out, you're on an angle forward a little bit, because otherwise you'd fall backwards, right? And so then we reach through as far as we can. We do pull throughs, max band tension. And then when your hamstrings and glutes are like your hamstrings are fried, your glutes are worked a little bit, but they're not fried yet. So then once we get through all 20, then we'll just do like a quarter bend over and just squeeze the glutes. All we do is squeeze the glutes and push the hips forward with the glutes. And we'll do 20 of those. And then what I went to afterwards was a glute ham raise, because I wanted to torch the hamstrings. So like, we did hamstrings, glutes in the first one. The second part torches your glutes, but lets your hamstrings rest. And then we go to the glute ham raise, and we went halfway down, back up, all the way down, back up as one rep. We did max reps of those to torch to the hamstrings, but then I needed a break before they went back. But I was kind of doing it to get their heart rate up a little bit. So I added plow swing jumps in for 20 as the rest for the posterior chain. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, or you could do like, say, jump squats or something like that in between if you didn't have like a plow swing.
Yeah.
Or you can actually literally
which
go back
only
to the
you
belt
and
squat.
Westside does.
Yeah. Which you could always go back to the belt squat, put the belt back on, and do your jumps there, because your max band tension belt squat jumps, which we do those too. So if you didn't have a plow swing, I just go.
What were you doing? What was your sets and reps for the pull throughs on the belt squat?
20s on everything but the glute ham raise. That was max reps. It's just that variation's pretty hard. So I let people get away with what they kind of.
Do you have three sets of 20 on the belt squat?
4 on all that. Yeah. Most of my people
four sets of 20 on the belt
most
squat.
of my people are 4 sets of everything. Like all of our accessories are 4 sets. For when I have elite on up, it's 4 sets. It's 3 sets below that. Below
with the belt squat, and then instead of adding weight to the belt squat, you just put on more bands.
More bands. Yep. Max band tension. Yeah.
And you're holding onto the belt. So with the belt hold, do you put your wrists, like, were you just grabbing the belt with your hands,
or
did
the belt
you put
around the hips.
You hang your wrists up?
No, belts are around the hips.
Okay.
No, we don't have to search it.
I was thinking like old school pull throughs.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Nice,
I was like, man, that's like, I don't know if mine's gonna be long enough.
Yeah, so the old school pull through is like you take the belt and you run your hands through like a Zercher. That works great too.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about training like who's in front of you. Like that's already torturous enough. So if I have someone who's just a killer, I can put their arms through and do it that way. If I don't have that killer, I'll make it comfortable, but make the exercises very hard, right? So like instead of like their arms getting like kind of raw and stuff, then I'll just put it around their waist.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that way it's one less thing. Cause like, you know, like I have a guy, Pat, in my gym, and he's just, he's been with me for, I don't know how to look, 15, 16 years now. Right. And, you know, he's in his mid 40s, but he's like, you know, mid high 800 pound puller at 242, just a shredded dude in his mid 40s. And, but he'll attack anything. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what happens to him as long as he goes forward, you know? So, you know, for him, it's like, if I get a little more out of Zercher and do it through, you know, having the belt around your arms, then I'm going to do that. But, with the people I had, they're really good lifters, but they're still a little newer to being at my gym. Can't run them off, you know?
We've actually thrown on the Zercher harness and then run a piece of webbing off of that and connected that to the belt squat.
Awesome.
And use that as like a variation instead of just off the hips. But I like the idea. It's been a long time since we've gone like max band tension only on the belt squat instead of like loading plate weight. It's probably time we put that back in.
You know, something I like
one that I was gonna say the one that we added in like the last couple weeks on upper was a finisher where we're taking like number 0 or number 1 bands and like putting them as high on a like rogue rig as you can on each arm, but then setting up like between the stations. So, you know, it's like the like rogue rig's got like a 43-inch span and then a 70-inch span if you're using like those long like Spieler bar, Dirty South, etc. So setting up on the 70-inch span or even the next one over, so you get a 43 and a 70-inch span, and then running the J cups up high as you can, running a band off the J cups, and then setting up a bench. So you're laying on your back on the bench and you're doing like a rear delt fly, right? But laying on flat on your back. So it's like reverse pec deck. Yeah. Same position. So your bands are X'd one through the other, but we're doing 3 sets of 50 pause reps. So you pause the bottom, you only come up a bit and you go right back down. Man, my upper back on Monday was sore to the touch.
Have you tried that yet? Palm up, palm neutral, palm the other way. So 1 set of 50 is the way you did it, pulling back this way. 1 set of 50s like this. 1 set of 50s like that.
Yeah, I like that.
Because you're hitting the same area, but you're hitting a slightly different angle. I know it's just something to just get going, but it's something to try, Because it's the same concept.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we just did palm facing up.
That's awesome.
But I'm looking for like a variation for the 3rd week. So I mean, maybe changing the 3 sets, changing that hand position would be a great one. It's just one set in each hand. 50 reps with a pause was like pretty perfect. I mean, most people use zeros. Number 1 bands was like quite spicy. Yeah. It was hard for sure. Yeah, it had a little tang to it.
I have a complete page of notes already. We haven't even. I want to drive to the gym right now and go check out that belt squat. Do all those things that were just listed right there, just to play with.
A bit of a. I think it was cool. I like this. A little bit of a different start. For everyone just joining in, we started recording just as we were talking. We felt like it was a good conversation, and suddenly realized that maybe everyone else would enjoy a little bit of it too. So, for those of you who are listening, hello. We are back with episode 16. I would say, probably biased, but I would say we're doing pretty good right now. This has been 3 or 4 weeks since the last episode. So living the dream here. Today we're going to talk about the application of conjugate system to prehab, rehab injuries, how we can think about restoration. We'll see how far we get in all of these things, but that's kind of what we've been discussing and had on our minds. So, what are things list? I think that's probably it that we'll talk about on the nose of this.
This might be more than one episode, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a real chance, which is okay. I guess a big piece is, I think one of the things that really gets overlooked when people talk about the conjugate system is people think about the performance and then often attribute it to something that's high value to those high-end athletes who have spent years on straight bars, and now they might look for variations. And for myself, from my experience over the 15 years of Squat March Barbell, is I just don't think that's true at all. I think that there's a whole bunch of factors and elements going on with the conjugate system and bands, chains, specialty bars that are worth getting athletes onto immediately in their training, especially for athletes who are sport athletes, CrossFitters, etc., and are looking for well-rounded strength and to build a fitness and capacity that just extends past performance into durability and harder to kill. So with that kind of piece, I think one of the things that the conjugate system really has to offer is the ability to add or remove pieces very easily as it relates to the individual. So whether you're dealing with someone who's coming in, who's got a shoulder issue and a straight bar just isn't an option, or a classic example for one of our guys, the reason we got the original specialty bars was that one of our athletes had super arthritic shoulders in his mid-60s, and there's just no world where he was racking a straight bar. So safety squat allowed him to continue to squat, where otherwise the options past that were really going to be, dumbbell, goblet, really, really limited air squat, that kind of stuff. So I guess tying into it or getting it started, what do you guys found? Like, is that something, how much have you like seen for the value of that in your own experience?
So, for us, obviously that kept me kind of in the game when I went to Westside Barbell, at first, my shoulders were already shot. I was already having issues with that, and having the specialty bars were great. It allowed you to work just as hard while you have an injury or an irritation, and you go 100%. But a lot of times people look at it, like you said, just looking at the bars, or hey, we have to take a look at the system though, right? Jesse, you mentioned that the system makes it very easy to exchange things in and out. So I want people out there to think about this, right? What do we do when we take the Westside system? You come in, we take a look at your movement quality, whether it's while you walk in the door, it could be during a squat, bench, deadlift, whatever it is. We look at your movement quality, then we choose a selection of special exercises to fix the problems that you have, right? You lack muscle or leverage in an area, you have a weak muscle group that causes you to have improper movement pattern, and then we place exercises to fix those issues. What's different with prehab? So if we want to prehab an individual, we take a look at what that individual does as a sport or for a living, so we take an athlete, and this is something that you've probably heard me say on a podcast earlier, in the previous podcast, is that if you train an athlete for a sport you've never trained before, find the best coach for that sport that's willing to talk to you. Find out what people are usually lacking, they're not good at, that they need to improve, but find out what the top 3 injuries are for that sport. So then you can find something now that you can probably put into play in your accessory movements as prehab, not to allow that individual to have those problems. Remember, we want to prehab, not rehab. Rehab, it's already too late. You got injured, so we have to take care of it. So we want to prehab. But when we're looking at what we're doing, part of that prehab is choosing the right exercises. So let's say you already, let's say there's some things that you're really lacking. We might choose a different rep scheme, right? Maybe we're not doing sets of 8 heavy or sets of 6 to 8 heavy on a special exercise because this is a muscle group that you've been lagging behind, that you've been ignoring or haven't put enough effort in. We might go a set of 20 first, 30s to get a lot of blood flow in the area, give it a little bit of work capacity in the area, get it moving, make sure that we're not overstressing it because it's not really a strong muscle group for you. We can take a look at our rep schemes can be a little different. Maybe we do sets of 100, 200 as a finisher on that muscle group at the end of workouts, just to bring a little more volume into it and bring a lot of blood flow to carry nutrients and hydration. But I want you guys to realize, if you guys been doing a conjugate system for a while, the thought process is already there. You're choosing special exercises to correct weaknesses. The only difference is sometimes a couple of things that we do is either change rep schemes or slowly build up an area. Maybe on some lower body days, after your lower body work, you do a little extra work, light, work, just to start to bring the volume up in those areas to catch it up. You put a little more emphasis on your special exercise days in those areas that are lacking, or that you need to prehab. If you train someone who's, say, a nurse, how many nurses have you met who haven't injured their back? The only ones I have met who haven't hurt their back are really young, just got into it. So if I have a nurse come to my gym, I start working on prehab for their back. I make sure their hip mobility is where it needs to be to not get injured, because most back injuries come from a hip mobility issue. And then I strengthen the glutes, hips, and spinal erectors and midline, right? And I do that whether someone's had a bad back or they haven't had one yet, just because I know that's what the job entails. That people are very susceptible to that in that type of sport. So take a look at the sport, take a look at the job, realize that we have special exercise days. We have our selection of finishers. You might want to do 2 finishers. Maybe you do one for the muscle group that got hit the hardest that you want to bring up, that's lagging for performance. But then you have another muscle group that is something that you need to prehab, make sure you don't get hurt. And you can do finishers, a second finisher, say, for that as well. There's a lot of different ways you can hit it, just like Jesse said, that it's very easy to pull in and out. And it's so easy, there's multiple different ways that you can do that. You have to find the optimal situation for you and your sport, or how far that deficiency is for you.
Yeah. So I love, Shane, you talked about that at your seminar, and something that really resonated was, when we have an athlete that comes into the gym, reaching out to somebody in the field, or even just thinking through the mechanics. So recently been training an Olympic hopeful rower, and just thinking through, like, what are those going to look? I didn't necessarily reach out to a coach, but what do we know, like, where the pattern overload is? You've got a lot of pulling, got a lot of knee flexion, not a lot of full open hip extension. So immediately right out the gate, she'd had a lot of things that were going on. She was getting some numbness in her 2 fingers, and we just had kind of her main season's getting ready to start here in January. So just kind of doing a check-in, because we've been doing 5 months, like, hey, how are things feeling? She's like, I got, 0 pain in my hands and elbows now, and I'm rowing. My knee pain's completely gone. And we've really just started introducing the program, but just that ability to offset the amount of pattern overload we see inside sport, and I mean, we can even think about this in a CrossFit sense with the general population of what do we know most humans do? Like they sit a lot. They tend to have rounded shoulders, tight hips. So we want to strengthen weak hips. Tight doesn't mean strong or good. It means they're probably weak. So let's strengthen hips, a lot of shoulders, opening up shoulders and getting the middle back, more involved. So we can prescribe that. And I think a good trainer right out the gate is going to be able to, program and choose the proper exercise selection of like, how do I offset all the things that are happening? And even running is the most injury prone sport in all of sports. And it's not because it's dangerous. Like it might be arguably the most functional thing that we do, but it does have a ton of pattern overload. And that's what creates the issue. And the conjugate system is really good. That accessory stuff can be really good for offsetting that stuff.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are cool there too. Like, so Shane was talking about like more like assessing an individual and then making adjustments to their accessory work and their pattern selection for their primaries. One thing that is really cool to think about, especially in that CrossFit environment, like you're saying, Chris, is that those pieces that are really macro, where like the community you're in. And that's often sometimes when we talk about what one coach does in like Ohio or Portland would be different from what we would do in Squamish, just because the nature of like the community, the country, etc. All those things have some kind of effect. I think Bob Decano actually wrote some interesting stuff years and years ago about like the nature of like human evolution and spread across the globe and the effects that had on predisposition to some sports. But anyways, the thing I was thinking about is like in Squamish, I mean, we've got a ton of people who either work from home and remotely and spend the day at their desk, or commute down to Vancouver, drive down, drive back. I mean, you're talking about hour 15 to hour 30, depending on where you're going. And then also might work a job where they're seated and at a computer all day. I mean, the idea of that, and then rolling back into class for the afternoon and going to do like, a big volume of pull-ups or hands overhead pattern, that something like that really changes the macro on our CrossFit programming overall. And I'm not sure that if I lived in a different area, I'd have to really consider what we get up to. But for our community in Squamish, and then also being huge outdoor drive where people are riding, running, skiing, they're outdoors a ton, is that there's a ton of time put into those sports. So I feel like one of the things that I try to make the meat on the plate for our athletes is upper back and lifting, because so many of those athletes are spending a ton of time in their sport. They're getting a ton of hard breathing in already. To show up and do 5 sessions a week and have all 5 be conditioning to add to their already conditioning volume or the amount of time that they're spending seated isn't really, honestly, the best product. And I mean, honestly, I get that it might make us more popular if we did that, and people love to just like get after it and go for it on those like sweat hard pieces. But I mean, honestly, like if lifting's the broccoli on your plate, as long as you feel the same about broccoli as I do, is that honestly, you just kind of need to make it happen. Whether it's your favorite thing or not, it might be actually best practices. And that's an interesting separator in programming, is best practices versus like being everyone's like friend, or have everyone be a big fan because all you do is long hero metcons and benchmarks. You're like, dude, you might win a bunch of friends, but you're going to lose them to injury. And it's not in their best interest for their performance or the longevity, et cetera. So I like the consideration of the way that you can alter your programming based on the community that you're in and the nature of athletes that you work with.
So like what we do at Fort is, and the way Adam programs, I really like it because it's, generally we're going to hit at least one conjugate day or like one strength day. And the way he runs the strength days is like, let's see. So what did we have? So deadlift was 4-3-2, 1-1-1, 2-3-4. So a little bit of a different format, but the 4-3-2 is really kind of an opportunity to just kind of warm up, build. And then on the back end, they're almost kind of like your drop set. So an opportunity to work on some technique with the athletes. But then we go from right there. Then we had a Pendlay rows, and then glute ham raises, and then did some finisher work, which I can't remember what it was. But even when you teach those, even if it's once a week or twice a week, what you're able to have is talk about the conversation of like, I was able to talk about why a GHR is so important, and everybody inside the gym should practice these on their own. even if they're not programmed in class, because we don't, you can't program everything, but this is a great piece for those who like to do extra work afterwards. Like, hey, if you got weak glutes and weak hamstrings, like do this glute ham raise. It'll make a lot of things feel better. So you get the opportunity to teach them where, yeah, a lot of people don't like that. You get CrossFits, where the athletes try to come in and dictate the programming with these, we call them the any old asshole workout, right? Like just make a massive chipper and every day is the goal is to outdo the day before, where it's like,
yeah,
again, we want to train optimally, not maximally. And that extra lifting day, getting away from intensity, working on strength, finding weaknesses, because the lifts are always going to do that. Like, hey, you develop a weakness here. A lot of the people inside of our gym at Fort, they know exactly what the Rhino machine is. They know exactly what the reverse hyper is. And that's our CrossFit athletes, not just our conjugate or our performance athletes. It's because we have that opportunity inside class to do it once, sometimes twice a week. And we can have those conversations of educating, because at some point there is some self-responsibility of the athlete inside the gym to know, like, hey, this is what I want to do, or this is what I need to work on, unless you're paying for personal individualized training, which that would be our job then to go and fix those things. But that's obviously not realistic for or needed for everybody.
Going off of what Jesse was talking about just a little bit earlier, for anybody who's seen the movie West Side versus the World, AJ Roberts in the part talks about Louis Simmons being the Bobby Knight of powerlifting. He's like, all he tells you what's wrong with what you're doing and what's bad. He's like, why would he tell you what's good? That's not going to help you. And when we were at West Side, that's what we expected. We wanted, like, you didn't turn around for praise. You turn around, what do I need to work on? It wasn't, hey, was that a good bench? Was there good speed on that? Was the technique good? Were my shoulders tight? Did I have a good leg drive? No, you want to know what's wrong because you had to be able to fix that, right? So people get caught up. You don't get caught up in what you enjoy, what you want to do, get caught up in what you need to do. That's extremely important. What, Jesse was saying about that. And when we're looking at that, there's a lot of things that we ignore. The system's set up great for success for that. But, we talk about CrossFit's brought up, like upstream, downstream. If you have an injury or an irritation, whatever the irritation is, usually the problem's upstream, downstream, And one of the things that we don't look at enough, I think, and what we've been diving deeper into in my gym is making sure we have full functioning joints. So make sure you have full internal and external rotation out of your shoulders. Make sure you have full internal and external rotation out of your hips. Those two things are a great start. If you don't have full internal and external rotation out of your shoulders, you're going to develop neck issues, elbow issues, shoulder issues, are going to come too. If you're not have full external and internal rotation in your hips, now we have to look at low back issues, knee issues, let alone the hip issues that come with it, right? So don't always think about just bicep, tricep, hamstring, quad, glute. Also think about internally into the joint. Maybe your special exercise day becomes a day that you work on the joint health, joint care, get as much range out of that joint as you're going to ever use in any situation, which for a powerlifter is a little more limited than CrossFit. But, basically I want you to have full access to the joint, your hip joint, your shoulder joint, for any movement that you could ask your body to do. And if we start off with that, then we can then gain optimal technique because we're not held back from joint capability. And then we also create the least amount of stress upstream or downstream from that joint because everything's moving the way it should. So those are things that people never want to train unless they get a coach that forces them to train those. But those are exactly what we need to do, things like that. So to just keep that in consideration.
Higher order athlete for sure makes a big difference in those environments, right? When it's not one-on-one and you're in a class environment or group setting, team setting, those sort of pieces, that higher order athlete who's more aware of how they're feeling in their body is happy to address or start a conversation with the coach, like in that session for what's going on or something they're feeling. I mean, the worst thing you hear, or one of the worst things you hear, I find is going to be that athlete who's like, well, it's been bothering me for weeks. And it becomes a conversation when clearly it is now fucked, and you're like, oh, so you had weeks of opportunity to have a positive effect on this, make a change, start a conversation about like, I don't really know how to address this or what to do, but like, this is bothering me, that's bothering me. And just either get some reprieve in the session itself by making logical or valuable modifications, or put together like a bit of a plan where like, how do you get through this and not lose training volume? Today I had two different examples of this. One, was one of the girls came this morning who one of her friends ratted her out a couple days ago, is that she's older and needs a full shoulder replacement. And this is the first that I'm really hearing about it. And she came in today to deadlifts, pull-ups, and ring dips as like the workout, and was not going to have any conversation about it. And I was curious to kind of see like, oh, I wonder what her plan's going to be. And you started setting up bands on the pull-up bar. And I stopped her and said, I was like, look, I'm going to stop you right there. And like, we're not putting our hands over our head today with where things are at with that joint. And I just like, oh, I thought it would be. And you're like, I mean, what are the chances that the athlete coming in is going to put together a better plan without the coach's input advice when it is their full-time job, week in, week out, month after month, year after year? And it's not that it has to be a coach giving the direction and telling them exactly how it's going to be, but it should be a conversation. And I was like, well, I mean, ring dips are not a go. Where are we at with, and my guess is some kind of multi-grip incline push-up position was going to be work for the pressing. And she's like, yeah, push-ups definitely hurt a lot. You're like, okay, that's not a good choice. Because you're going to survive today to what end? And the modification became, and this is a great example, I feel like, of where those specialty bars can be used in different ways than you might think. And so we use one of the Elite FTS camber multi-grip bars. And then we flipped it so she had like a shorter range of motion. So she put the bar in the rack at a height that was pain-free, had a neutral hand position, and came down to her chest touch the bar. But with it flipped upside down, that range of motion was reduced from a full range of motion push-up and was pain-free. Easy solution, no irritation to that joint, continuing to be able to function, even be able to do the workout with the group, just with modifications. Another one was one of the other girls came in this morning, and what was her story? Has got some shoulder piece on the go as well, and was just like motivated to continue to like use the machines, get on the runner, get on the stepper, and those sort of pieces. And I was like, you can really do 3 days of low body work on the lifting side. I mean, if the shoulder is an issue, but it's not like a fractured clavicle, I mean, the safety squat usually is going to be totally user friendly. That's like the easy one, or the 4.5 inch camber bar, like something that takes just some of that pressure off the shoulder joint, allows them to rack the bar pain free. The bar is like in a position where it's not going to roll or move, so it's not going to change its position. And then you can work through these things. And a lot of these pieces, I mean, a deadlift becomes a good morning. And then all the rest of that work is totally good to go. So taking that CrossFit athlete, switching them to the lifting programming for maybe the day, maybe the week, maybe a couple of weeks, coupling that with some treatment, maybe a little physio and massage. And we're probably back on track in a couple of weeks and she's back to 100%. But you have to have the part of that becomes the athlete's piece, is you have to be willing to start that conversation, have an open mind, and be willing to make change. I mean, the unwillingness to make a change is one of the things that stifles athletes the most, I feel like. I just feel like that's such a killer for opportunity. Because in that couple weeks, so let's say it takes her 2 or 3 weeks to get back from the shoulder issues she's got on the go. What does she learn inside of there? I mean, for her, it would probably be quite a lot. So she joins a couple of lifters and digs into our powerlifting lower body stuff. So dynamic lower, max effort lower, and accessory lower, and gets in 6 of those training days in 2 weeks. She's probably expanded her skill set, her willingness to be like, oh man, I could totally use this. She continued to get solid training days in the gym instead of like, I'll just take a couple of weeks off and see if just running and relaxing at home fixes this. Which, I mean, almost every time it does not. Spoiler alert. And just those conversations about like, utilize that coach's knowledge, because the other side too is referral. Like, if someone comes to you and they're like, hey, this is what's got going on, what would you recommend? Like, honestly, in this particular case, I would lean towards like going for like, I would reach out to the chiro. I would reach out and get some soft tissue work done via massage or physio, or this is a really great one in my experience for like IMS or that dry needling, like that sort of piece. Like that coach, the older that coach is, the longer that coach has been coaching, they probably have a huge volume experience, seen a ton of this sort of stuff, maybe seen the exact same thing before, and can be like save you a whole bunch of time and money in getting you down the right path and like back to training, or potentially not even missing any training at all.
There's with that, it's pretty interesting is you have that issue and you teach the conjugate system. The conjugate system is the system that is least likely to have that problem, but we still have that problem when people start with us, right? And I say least likely to have the problem because one of the beautiful things about the conjugate system is, what do? We constantly search for what's holding us back, right? Which means if it's a lack of articulation in the joint, or you don't have good joint strength, your joints aren't healthy, or you need to bring up, triceps, back, whatever. We're in the hunt for that all the time, and we still get that. So anybody who doesn't train this way, it's even worse, because at least if like that lady's been with Jesse long enough, she will learn, ask questions if you have a problem, because there's a fix to it, right? Like people in my gym who've been there for a little while, if someone's talking about injury, they're like, go talk to Shane. Well, I have an appointment later with, like, go talk to Shane. Because the problem, the deal with it is people like Jesse, Chris, me, we've dealt with ultra high level athletes. We've dealt with every problem you're going to see. We've seen it all. You might go pick a massage therapist. Maybe they're decent. Maybe they're not. We know which massage therapist to go see for the problems that you have. I literally had down to the point where it's like, I have like, if my shoulder feels this way, I get this massage therapist. If it feels this way, I get this massage therapist. If my hips are a problem, I go see this person. If my neck's an issue, I go see that person. So I even had multiple massage therapists for different body parts. And then it's like, okay, who do you go for dry needling? Well, there might be 20 people in your town that dry needle. Well, trust me, if you have a coach who's at a high level, who knows their stuff, they're going to know the best person to go to. Because at the end of the day, we're looking for a result. I sent a client somewhere and I went somewhere and I didn't get the result that I expected. I keep going until I find out who the person is. And that's what we do. But remember that what the system is all about, it is hunting down weaknesses and fixing them. That just doesn't mean the big muscle groups that you have. It covers everything. Do you have good articulation of your spine? Can you independently move each vertebrae through your neck all the way down, your back? What issues do you have? Look for them. Do you have poor articulation in your toes? Do you have poor articulation in your ankles? There is always a room for improvement and advancement. But like Jesse said, do not be shy to ask your coach, especially if they've been around for a long time. There's a reason why they've been around for a long time. They have fixes for issues, right? But then also lean back on the system. I take it you guys are watching, podcasts about the conjugate system because you're probably interested in the conjugate system, or you're doing it already. Think of the principles of the conjugate system. We hunt down weaknesses. Okay. And we have an exercise selection and a equipment selection that is beyond any other system out there that exists. We have a rep range. I mean, look at the rep ranges we talk about. We talk about 1 rep to 200 reps. We talk about moving weight for 1 to 5 minutes. We have these vast rep ranges. We have these vast selection of exercises, and we have an understanding. When you've been in the system long enough, you start to see movement patterns that are improper, and you will know the fixes immediately. You know what's weak, what lacks mobility, what lacks strength. And we've gone to, and we've touched upon this many times, technique is 2 big things. You have to have optimal mobility to achieve optimal position. Then you have to have optimal strength to maintain that position for that lift. Because you have that in squat does not mean you possess it in an overhead press, or you possess it in a bench press, or you possess it in other lifts. It means you have it for that lift. We have an exercise selection from main movements to accessories that exceeds anybody out there. Therefore, it can't hide. Weaknesses can't hide. You just might not be paying attention to it. Okay? But that's where you lean on a high quality coach. And it comes back to what Chris said also. If you're not paying for personal training and you take classes, or you use a gym and use programming, ask questions if you have a problem. Okay? You're also responsible where if say Chris walks by, you're in a CrossFit class, goes, hey, you have weak hamstrings. That means on days that you're not training with him or training with a class or after the class, like he said, hit glute ham raises, hit different stiff leg deadlift variations, change the variation of stiff leg deadlift every time, right? Hit different variations of glute ham raises, different rep schemes, different tempos, things like that. It is on you. If you're getting personal training, it's on your coach. You just have to execute what they tell you to. If you're going to take classes or follow programming, then you do that. Let whoever's programming for you aware that you've got this glaring weakness. In all honesty, if they don't know by the videos that you see that you send them, you're probably with the wrong coach. But if you're in a class, take it upon yourself to add extra work into those areas. Like Chris said, it's important and you need to. You can't expect to get 100% of everything you need from the class. People need a coach needs a program for the whole class, not one person, and they need to hit all the big areas. And it's kind of sometimes up to you to hit the small little areas.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's also like as trainers for those that are out there. I mean, going through that process of, what's going on, what's the pathology of the joint, what's created the issue, and then running through like, okay, is there a motor pattern that can offset it? Is it a blood, is blood flow? All the things we talk about, accessory work to the finisher. And there's going to be times where that stuff just doesn't work, at least in my experience. Obviously, I've had times where it's like, okay, it's not working. Sometimes you get performance athletes. It's had this conversation actually with a competitive CrossFit athlete, and it was like, hey, like I need you to over communicate with these things, because she thinks that by telling me that her knee's bothering her, like she's being weak and she's trying to say that she doesn't want to do the work, which I know her well enough. Like I was like, look, you're the athlete that I have to pull back. Like I don't want the athletes I got to push, because I don't have the kind of energy for that. Like I'd rather have the athlete I got to pull back. But with that said, like I need to know when things are kind of going on. Like don't wait till it's too late. Because at that point, if you've been dealing with it for a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, like now you've been in an inflammatory state for 8 weeks. Like how much longer is it going to take us to get out? Kind of what you alluded to. So for me, like, at X Factor at ours, we had just a phenomenal PT. I still use them a lot. We got a great one at Fort that we use as well. And I mean, I always valued that. Like, I'm like, hey, like I could probably figure this out. I might be able to figure it out. Let's say not probably, but I might be able to figure it out. But I know the skill set of this PT, and he's been trained. He studies the hell out of this stuff to this day. He's very good at that acute, minor motor pattern, diagnosing, being able to test laxity and all the things that, PTs are trained in that I'm not. Like I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I'm very comfortable with that role. But I love learning. We're generalists, so we should learn from that PT. Like I use that as an opportunity, like, hey, Luke, like what's going on with this? Like, what are some things that potentially caused it? What are some things that I need to start looking forward to, when she gets done or he gets done with you? Because the other thing you're going to have is like when you start dealing with athletes, like you can't control environments on an athletic field. So you don't get to move perfectly like with a barbell and stationary like we get to inside the gym. So you're going to have things that happen with wrestlers. We have it, in football. For football, it's all the time. Like, the training really changes based on how the athletes are feeling through the games. And it's really just like, how can I get you best prepared and, keep you strong, which, mostly just everything, and a lot of lifting with the football players anyway. But having that team of like massage therapists and having your PTs, like that's an important part of training, people and keeping people healthy. And that's part of our job. Like, it's not just performance based, but you're going to have people from general PPP people to advanced athletes that you need to be able to perform this.
It's a huge factor for sure. I think if you have the opportunity to train in the gym that's got like the full system in place, where they've got a like superhero team of practitioners in with heavy duty coaches, that the cycle of that is, man, the value is incredible, because one, that environment fosters knowledge back and forth. So, we've got chiro, massage and physio out of our facility, a bunch of people, and they're full time and they've been with us for years. And that's sort of like back across the lines. I mean, it's pretty cool to see practitioners who have come in with us, started learning, adopted the conjugate system, and now you'll see them working through. Like we have 3 treatment rooms. One of them's inside the gym, so they can be back and forth between being in the gym and then into make more changes and back out to the gym. And they'll set up like a box squat and work that athlete through a set of box squat. Okay, back to the room. Okay, back out. Better, worse, the same. All right, back in. And you can go through stuff and look at it in a different way, and sort of that ability for that system to be utilized by practitioners is crazy. I mean, I think the conjugate system really bridges that gap between rehab where you're dealing with, moving your body only, or band as your external resistance, to systemically loading and back to performance. And sort of the practitioner who has a strong handle on the conjugate system, I think, has way more to offer the athlete. And the coach who has a strong team of practitioners to lean on is a huge system. Because something I would see now in the gym, I'd be like, I feel like this is what I'm seeing going on. Like, what I would do would be to be like, hey, if they work with one of our people, like, who do you see? You're like, okay, great. I'll shoot them an email tonight when I get home and be like, blah, 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 blah. Like in the gym when they're squatting, here's this like shift in the hips that I'm seeing, blah, 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 bit of a description. And they can leave it with that. And before that person steps into the treatment, that practitioner has already invested time in them. They're already coming in. They know what, when that person steps through the door, what is some of the pieces that might be going on. They know what they're looking for. And it changes that environment of that interaction from minute one of maybe a 60-minute session. And then the outgoing of that is that practitioner at the end of the day shooting me an email back saying, it was this piece going on, or yeah, that was exactly what it was. Here's what we did. Here's what I recommend. And the stronger that relationship becomes, the more it's like that, more that trust is built, the more they can be like, just give generals on me. Like they should be, I would encourage them to like avoid, this, but they're okay. Don't squat them. But a box squat to a high box will be okay. And hip hinging pattern should be fine as well. Just keep the loading moderate for the next week. And then I see them again early next week and we can reassess. This happens all the time. I mean, we have athletes travel here to work with myself and the team of practitioners that we've got, and can run through things in a really different way. I mean, there's been times where we've had one athlete working in a rack and 3 practitioners and myself and Adam all standing around watching the same person moving through a range of motion and then talking about it. And you're like, I mean, for me, you're like, that is about as high value as it gets for opportunity, but it still remains on the athlete to like start these conversations, ask these questions, because I mean, there's stuff that can happen or stuff that the athlete might feel that a coach might not see. I mean, there is stuff for sure. Like someone would come up and be like, hey, I'm feeling this in my like low back, or I'm feeling this in my crease in my hip on this movement. You're like, oh, okay, let's have a look. You're like, it looks pretty good, actually. You're like, okay, so let's modify. We can try some things. But it might be something I might not pick up otherwise. And you're really counting on that person to share, or be like, hey, yesterday when I was training, like, I felt good. I went home and my hip's been a little cranky since. Like, what do you think about dumbbell squat cleans? And you're like, well, I mean, maybe we could do something different today, and be able to sub a pattern in to set that athlete up for success, because the long term is as few lost training hours as possible. And a practitioner who knows what they're doing and has good communication with the coaches is going to get that lost training hours potentially, for most people, down to 0. It's just going to be a shift in focus, or a shift in like how they're spending their time, which honestly, for me, even as an athlete, has opened the doors. I mean, injury has steered my athletic career to a medium degree, from being a, like, all that I care about is climbing, to 3 times dislocated shoulder repair, being unable to climb, picking up running ultra distance, ending up with a ankle injury that I can barely manage to walk on, into CrossFit, into powerlifting, and those sports have steered along, and I've recovered from all of those things to better than I was before. But some of it's taken quite a bit of work. And I would say that even as I've recovered, like as I got through and could go back to climbing, I was so far down the rabbit hole on other things that I was loving that I maybe never would have found CrossFit if it wasn't for my injuries, and a willingness to step laterally on what I was up to, instead of just being pouty about not being able to do my most favorite thing all the time.
Think about the system though, right? It was founded on an injury. So Louis broke his back for a total of 9 places, his second time breaking his back, and that is when the system was invented. Like, think about that. Like, we're talking about how to solve injuries with this system, and the injury was literally developed. The system was literally developed because of an injury. Louis broke his back in 6 places the second time. I think it's 3 times the first time. And that's when he was laying face down in one of those beds and wrote out. And he had been reading about what the Russians and other people were doing. He was reading about the conjugate sequence system. And he put together his start of the West Side system because what he was doing wasn't working, right? So we all find our way to lifting if we're not quitters. If you're a quitter, you might not have found your way to lifting. You just might have quit your sport that you love to do. Don't know why you do that, but you find a way to get there. And then sometimes that became your passion, right? Like you might stay in the sport and you might be like, I'm glad I found lifting, or you might really get into lifting, or you become a coach because you see the value of how you're, like I say, everybody walks through the doors for the same exact reason, to improve quality of life. One person wants to get healthy, another one wants to break a world record, but it's the same exact reason. The system's set up for it. It was founded on it, but at the same time, you have to look at personality types. Jesse, I've been up to his gym. He lives in an awesome area where people are really big in outdoors, which I love that. I live in Ohio. What's there to do out here? And what I'm getting by is like, we'll have people who are really good shape. There's nothing to do out here. You're not going surfing. You're not going rock climbing. You're not, going skiing. You don't have that stuff, right? So people probably watch a little more TV here, or, we have things that are kind of far apart. So we drive a lot, and that plays into things, right? So just because that person works out really hard, but if they sit and watch TV more than people, more than most people do, their hamstrings are shortened when they're sitting on the couch. Their shoulders might be rolled forward. Maybe they're sunk into it. Maybe their psoas is getting short because they're sunk in the way they're rounded. There's just a lot of issues. And between Jesse and Chris and I, we live in 3 different areas, and we run into unique problems and unique situations from those. But people's personality types can be different depending on where you live too. So the way they communicate or what they're willing to talk about or not willing to talk about can all be a part of where they grow up and a part of like local society. Like Einstein, said, for every action, there's a reaction. You have to pay attention to those actions because there is a reaction for everything. And we have to get down to that. And that's how we can help keep people safe, by understanding how they communicate. What is their lifestyle like outside the gym? Gyms are a living entity. If Jesse moved to Ohio, he's going to make some adjustments. If I moved out to where Jesse lives, I'm going to make some adjustments with what I do. I'm going to have a learning curve to see what the common injuries and common problems or how fast people recover. Maybe these people do a lot of outdoor activities. Maybe I would have to lower the amount of volume in my workouts for them because of what they do on the outside. But when you're trying to keep someone safe, you have to look at their personality. You have to look at communication. How do they communicate? And you have to look at local society and how things are around and what they grew up in to understand the thought process and things that could be going on into problems they could potentially have.
I mean, if you end up somewhere that sucks suddenly and you're like in a spot where like, oh, I've got this issue going on, long-term hip issue, those sort of pieces. In my experience, both as a coach and an athlete, I think there's very few things that don't have a solution. Mm-hmm. I think that in most cases, I mean, there's always stories. Like mm-hmm. there's always stories of someone had these impossible injuries. I mean, Louis has a really long list mm-hmm. of pretty rough injuries and continued to perform all the way along. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've ruptured my Achilles. I've had my shoulder repaired. Both ankles are pretty beat up. I've had a bunch of stuff come out of those things. I have a really sore finger from dodgeball in early October. That's not getting a lot better. But so far, everything that's come up for me, I've been able to get through. Whether it's taken a couple weeks or a bunch of years, and I think one of those things, I've always really loved Kelly Starrett's test-retest piece. So you've got some kind of assessment. So if I see a practitioner, if I work with a coach, I'm looking to assess what I'm doing, if it's helping or not. And it's okay for it to not have worked. That information is actually equally as valuable as if it did work. The problem is, again, a lack of communication, or feeling like sometimes people get weird about like, hey, try this piece of mobility. And they're like, how is it? You're like, oh yeah, it's better. If it's not better, it's actually worth saying it's not any better, because if the coach is good, they're like, okay, sweet, no problem. If that wasn't helpful, then this probably wouldn't be as well. So let's try this instead. How about this piece? You're like, oh, whoa, that actually is better. Yeah. And so giving that coach the opportunity by giving them honest feedback really allows them to do their job to their highest level. And the same thing is true with practitioners. I mean, to see a practitioner and, get a massage or have an adjustment and be like, did it help? Like, yeah. I mean, if that's not true, it's worth being like, you know what? I don't know. We'll see. And sometimes it's a matter of giving it 24 hours to let some stuff settle out. And like, actually, you know what? It really did. Like, I went to sleep. I got up the next day. It felt better. Training felt way better. That's totally a thing. Or, I mean, I've used Shockwave before and had it be like treatments 1 and 2 were like, oh my gosh, that is a huge change. And then the third treatment be like, it's not having as large an effect. You're like, okay, great. Like, it worked. It started creating change. And now I need to try and move on to something else. But it's a constant like test, retest. Is it getting better? Is it changing? Change is a valuable metric, because you're like, oh, it was really bugging me like in the front of the shoulder. And now it's more like bugging me in the back of the shoulder. Like, I mean, honestly, I feel like if you can get change in a joint, even for discomfort, it shows at least there's an opportunity that there's some change there, instead of just like, man, everything I do, it always hurts in the front of the shoulder. Everything like where it's just like it's really settled in and the road might be much longer. But I mean, the biggest things that I would say is, one, you cannot give up. Like, giving up on getting through an issue, even if it's been years of a knee issue or a low back issue. I mean, my patellar tendon bothered me for the first couple years when we opened Gym 1, where I would put like a knee wrap on light under my pants at the start of the day, just to kind of give it some support and some pressure, seem to make it feel better. And I was like, man, I think I'm just going to have a knee issue from here forward. And that's not the case at all. I mean, my knees are way better at 43 than they were in my late 20s. I have zero knee complaints and knee issues at all anymore. And I think you just need to keep searching for those good people, keep reaching out, asking questions, like, communicate with people that you have the opportunity to have exposure to, have thoughtful engagements with the practitioners and coaches you work with. I mean, what they don't want to hear is like, my life is hard and sad. I mean, they'll probably listen, but it's way more motivating to have an athlete who is like, I'm motivated to do the things. If you give me stuff to work on, I will do those things. If you willing to put some time into me, I will put that same amount or more time into me. That's motivating, because I mean, trust me, a coach and practitioner, their success is getting you past where you ever thought you were going to be, whether it's back from an injury, whether it's to a new level of strength, conditioning, or sports performance. Like, their drive and motivation, it makes everyone look good. Like, the athlete being successful makes the whole team look really good and like they know what they're up to. And it lets everyone learn and build a bigger skill set to make the turnaround or the time required to bring an athlete to the next level or back to 100% is going to be reduced for the next person down the chain. Because you're like, oh, when I've seen this in the past, this is what we did.
Learn to ask questions and how to find the right therapist. And what I mean by that is this. One of the things that Jesse said is he liked Kelly Starrett's test retest. What do we do with the conjugate system? You hit a safety squat, bar squat, say you do it week 1, so you can set a metric, so you have your weight for dynamic. Then you go through a series of different types of squats and deadlifts and good morning variations. And then, periodically down the road, you're going to retest that, right? To see what you're doing, so show you, well, if your program's laid out correctly and are making improvements, right? So test retest is in the conjugate system. Probably part of why Jesse likes it when he found it out for a rehab, right? Because it's the same thing. Then when Jesse was talking about training really hard, well, what's something that we talk about? Intensity. And your results lie at the edge of intensity. CrossFit talks about that. Conjugate talks about that as well. So if you run into a therapist the work feels very intense, that actually might be a pretty good thing. Okay. We also want variety. So whenever I've healed up people from injuries, a lot of times I find movement that works for them, an exercise that works for them. And then I try to think of how many variations of that exercise can I come up with, because I want to do everything I can to clear that fault and that problem. So if I can go through every type of exercise I can think of that can fix that problem, and I get to where they all work, and work my way backwards from maybe I only have 1 or 2 it works, and then I bring something else in and I find a third one, then I find a fourth one. Then maybe after you do those 4, one of the exercises that didn't work for you before now is open and available to you because you've healed and fixed the problem enough to now access new exercises, right? So finding a therapist that has a wide variety of tools, finding a therapist that tests and retests your results and is trying to get constant improvement, not just okay with, well, we got you better. It's not about, some therapists are very good at their jobs, but their job was detailed and to get someone to be able to go back to work and be able to, turn their TV on, drive a car, take a shower by themselves, dress themselves. That's not the same as finding a therapist who works with athletes, who's trying to find the most minute problems to fix and clear so that there's no issues again, or very detailed, hard issues to find. Because the problem that you're going to find is that the better athlete you are, the better you are at hiding faults and mistakes. Doesn't mean they don't exist. You're just really good at it. So you have to find therapists and coaches that can find those little minute problems. That's not the same as someone who doesn't work out, who's not in good shape, who develops an injury, got hurt at work, or fell down and got hurt. It's not the same level of therapist, the same type of therapist. I don't even want to say level, because therapists who are going to work with that aren't necessarily the same type of therapist who want to work with an athlete. And the therapist who want to work with an athlete probably don't want to work with somebody who they just want to get back to work and not exceed the potential, exceed what they were doing before. Because ultimately, if I'm rehabbing an athlete, I want to rehab them, then afterwards I want to take them to a higher level in performance that they've ever achieved in their life after the injury. So that looks completely different. So ask around. You want the person in the area, not a person in the area. Okay, so try to find out who the person is. Find out the person that everybody goes to and no one else can figure it out. That's who you want to talk to.
Yeah, I think that's, if we take a look at this just whole picture of injury prevention and rehabilitation, kind of start off like good rehabilitation is going to start with good exercise selection and beating the overload to the punch, if we can, so to speak. And then we talked about kind of the rehabilitation of like, things are going to go wrong, and there's going to be a time where it's going to be outside your scope. And that's when we use our team, and we work hard to build that team of professionals and lean on them and learn as much as we possibly can from them to broaden our knowledge to help others when this comes up again. Because most patterns seem to kind of, a lot of them are very, similar. I think the one other consideration then becomes, obviously the training isn't good for us. It's our ability to recover from the training is what makes us. We're only as fit as we recover. Do you guys, Jesse, I know you do, I've heard a little bit of yours, but do you guys promote anything specifically, like as a whole? I'm sure individually you do, but like, what about some rejuvenation? What about percussive and myofascial release? Like, do you guys have any prescriptions with people to try to like, okay, we're going to add this in as like extra work for you? Because that's obviously our ability to recover, and treat the tissues and get the tissues healthy so that we can stress and, just like, Shane talked about at the beginning of this with the belt squat damage. Like, what do you guys do with your athletes for that?
For us, we use a bunch of different stuff. I think the overlying piece on it is, again, test, retest. So I was actually watching a video recently on YouTube where they're talking about like ordering the restoration methods used post training for like least valuable to most valuable. And, people kind of get on the case of like rolling, and that's just like your muscle tissue does not, like if it's that easily perturbed, then, this would be the case and you would deform every time you sat and so on and so forth. And yet I would say at the end of the day, before training, the athlete who spends some amount of time rolling generally is moving better at the start of their training session and has less gripes, aches, and pains. So whether that's just by drawing blood into the area or just some very broad and general movement by just the process of actually rolling. But in practice, what I've seen is athletes who incorporate rolling leading into the training session are generally better off, deal with less issues. So rolling, stretching, I think for sure is a piece. We lean really heavily on Supple Leopard, Kelly Starrett's like the Ready State stuff. I just love it. I mean, the system started with him. Like he feels like the original start. Like he's the guy who started all that. Like if you use a lacrosse ball in the gym or 2 lacrosse balls taped together and a foam roller and a band, I mean, it's probably because of Kelly Starrett. So I think that's a piece that's like, we've continued to utilize that. We have Supple Leopard, like a bunch of places in the gym, reference pages from that as we're prescribing stuff. and lean pretty heavily into that. I mean, that the second book with the at the end of it, that's got the prescriptions where you can just flip to a page and you're like, oh, I need help on my squat. And you flip to the back of that book and it's got like 15 options there that just show a photo that sometimes for an athlete, like, oh yeah, that one. And it's just a reminder. Or you can look through them and be like, which haven't I done or tried before? And you can do test retest. So I can do 5 back squat with an empty bar, try this one, go again. Actually, that helps a lot. So I really like that system, and we've utilized that quite heavily. Massage guns for sure. We have a couple of like the massage guns at the gym that we use, Hypervolts. So we've got a couple of those that are just available for everybody. I definitely have one of those of my own. We use Normatex. The hips seem to be the worst, and the arms seem to be, maybe they're good, but the legs definitely seem to be high value. They just need to be used in pretty high volume. Like if you put the Normatex on, it feels like they're best at like an hour to 2 hours. But we definitely use that sort of stuff. As a specific thing that's very common is that all of our lifters and then our CrossFitters and mountain athletes will put it into like what I just color the writing in purple. So it's an option for mountain athletes and CrossFitters just because it often doesn't fit in the time. But on heavy lower body days where we've gone, max barbell, etc. So our lifters on Mondays and Fridays do this every single week, is we finish the session with 5 minutes on the Echo Bike. And we'll do 6 cals for men, 5 cals for women. Or if the athlete is like newer, smaller, etc., then we'll do about 10 to 12 seconds is what it really should be. So if you're getting 5 or 6 cals, you need those done in 10 to 12 seconds. If it's longer than that, then it needs to be shortened. But we'll do 5 times that time duration on the minute of maximum effort. So as hard as you can go on the Echo. And then for the rest of the minute, like I sit upright, I take my hands off the handles, and I drop the cadence down or RPM down to like 36 to 40 and light and easy. And then at the top of the next minute, full effort again. And this is honestly just something that we found ourselves through experimentation, but for sure across the board, athletes that do this, especially if you're a Friday lifter, is that you wake up Saturday morning feeling much better off. And your recovery cycle over the weekend is much higher, and you're in a better spot come Monday, 72 hours later for that max effort. So we've seen a lot of positive restoration on lower body pieces, finishing out with that full effort Echo Bike piece. Yeah, that's been super effective for us. And then, I mean, treatment, you don't have to be injured to go see the physio.
Yeah.
Like just getting regular treatment, because the other side for them is that when I'm regularly getting treatment, I deal with less problems. And what I would always say to people is like, if you're going to spend some amount of money through the year on healthcare, or you have X amount of coverage, is that don't wait for there to be a problem. Because once there's a problem, you're probably going to spend a bunch more. But if you can just consistently be like, I get one treatment every 2 weeks all year long, and I switch between physio, chiro, massage, whatever you feel like is like the one that fits the situation the most. Because I definitely agree with Shane. I go for physio, massage, and chiro for different things for each of those. And sort of managing that through the year for being consistent in your treatment plan with those practitioners is very high value. Because there's times when you'll come in and they're like, oh my gosh, like your trap is so jacked up on your left, and you can see it's doing this, and you get the release. You're like, oh man, I didn't even notice that in my training, and that feels way better. And they can see changes because they're seeing you consistently. Versus if you're switching between people, or you're inconsistent, or that sort of stuff. I mean, it's a process of like meeting the athlete, establishing what their norms might be for them, assessing that athlete. Like all those things take time, and it's nice to have those all done before you deal with things. And then a lot of time you can hopefully avoid lost training hours and volume of treatment by preemptively just stacking it up and getting it done and staying ahead of the curve on that sort of thing. Because sometimes you feel like $1 million walking around, and that practitioner lays into those adductors, and you just feel your eyes roll in the back of your head, and you just it's like I'll never tap, and then suddenly you find yourself like I need to tap. It needs to stop right now.
No, but you're right. Like you don't.
I mean, that's a quick and dirty on the things we get up to.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like sometimes you don't recognize that you have a fault going on, because they don't go 0 to 100. It's not like, one day you squat, you're perfect, your position's perfect, your joints are perfectly healthy, full internal external rotation, you have full access to the whole joint, and the next day you go in and all of a sudden your technique's horrible. It starts to slowly tighten up. You start to slowly lose it. So if you have someone that's constantly used to looking at it, you might feel fine going like, I probably didn't need to go in today, but what the heck, I'll go in. You go in there like, oh, you lost about 10% of range in your hip over a lot, over where we had you at when you left last time. Okay. Well, then what you find out is like one of my friends was a chiropractor. What he started doing is he started X-raying everybody, but didn't charge them. He would X-ray them before and afterwards. And then he said that he noticed if he would retain a 0.5 millimeter change, like if he made an adjustment and that adjustment led to a 2 millimeter change in the position of the spine, right? As an example, we'll just use the spine example. That if he did an adjustment, that meant you'd retain a 0.5 millimeter of that. So if you had 2 millimeter change, you need to see him 4 times. He didn't know it at first, but he wanted to develop a system that wasn't, he's like, I don't want to be the guy who tells people, hey, just every week, come back. He's like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take money from people, but also people aren't going to believe you if that's the case. So he's like, I want something measurable. So he started measuring before and after, like I said, and he kept track for years. And then he found like in these different different areas, how much they retain from that adjustment. And so then he could tell somebody, hey, roughly here's where you're going to be at, and here's why. But he had good reasons to tell them, right? So you're not going to maybe notice those small things, but someone who's working on you will, or they have the measurement or a way to measure that is there for you too. So it's just another set of eyes on you. It's like having an additional coach, additional training partner. Those things are all good, and a lot of times the people who you're training with, if you have training partners, they see you all the time. They can get caught up in conversation, have some fun in a good conversation. They lift, your lift looks good. They don't think much of it. They don't really dig too deep, or maybe they're not looking as hard all the time. That person hasn't seen you in a while. That's their job to assess you. They take a look at you because they haven't seen you in a while, and it's a lot easier for them to often pick the problems up.
Yeah, I think you talked about this at the end of the day, like you were beating the heck out of your body. Like if you want the highest fitness results require high physiological doses. Like that's how you don't get fitter by doing the minimal amount of work. Like you get fit by doing hard work. You get stronger by doing hard work. You get stronger by beating things up. Like all the mechanical stress, creates micro trauma to all the soft tissues, and it's the repairing process that allows you to become stronger, and those tissues heal stronger, and they densen and thicken, and now they can pull on bones harder. And one of the things I've really tried to push not just to the athletes, but also especially to my GPP people in the classes, where it's like, hey, look, there's a self responsibility for this stuff, and like you need to practice it. It's a skill. Like you're not going to be as good at it the first time as you will be the 100th time, but like a lot of this stuff, you want to come in, like people just think that you're going to outrun this stuff. You can come in and you can just do a really hard CrossFit workout and go about your day, and like that's going to be it. Like there's a longevity purpose. You need to know how to pull off the gas pedal in certain workouts and know what's appropriate for you, so there's some self-responsibility there as well. But if you want to beat the heck up out of your body, you also got to give as much love as you can too. And I know for me, like that's what I found, like it's been best. Like in our theater room, like we've got an ottoman, and the ottoman's got the Theragun, and it's got a all the yoga tune-up balls, the big ones, the small ones, the peanuts, calf rollers, like all the things you can think of. And like, have a pretty hard rule of like spending, 30 minutes, like pick an upper body. I try to pick like what I'm going to do the day before. So if I'm going to do lower the next day, like I'm going to sweep the quads, and I'm going to dig into the hips, and maybe I'm going to hit some static stretching. And like right now I've been having a lot of shoulder stuff just because I've been on the road a little bit more, been on computers a little bit more, and had a couple muscle up workouts where, definitely my left, middle traps and lower traps are pretty jacked. So I had to be careful about like the volume, because I know there's a certain point where there's a breaking point there where I haven't given it enough attention to get it rehabilitated so that I can perform really well. So I've had to like pull down a little bit, and I'm starting to get back ahead of it again. But that's an important part of the whole training process. Like we prehabilitate by performing, prescribing the right movements and being able to assess what's breaking down and being able to prescribe then where do we fix it. We utilize a team when we need it with rehabilitation, and then put some impetus on the individual to make sure that you are also, if you don't have the ability to go to massage therapists and chiros and PTs, and hey, like there are ways to do this manually, just like Kelly taught us, in the 365-day project. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's certainly better than not doing anything. So if you want to push your body hard, you also got to, give it the love and treat it.
There's variety in that too is a big difference. I think that one of those things that can happen as well, like that's where Supple Leopard has been really good, is making sure that you are continuing to try new stretches. Like just like you're lifting and just like CrossFit is, don't get super stuck on I always do the stretch. Like even if it's working great, keep doing it, but maybe expand that skill set, because you don't know the next piece of mobility that you try might just be like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing I've done, or man, I had no idea that was that tight, or my range was that restricted through there. And I think the same thing is true with the type of treatment you get. So if you go for like, if you've never been for IMS and like needling, 100%, that is worth experimenting, trying. Like, I mean, cups. Like I've traveled with cups to competitions because there's a time and a place where they're really high value. I mean, I'll get up in the middle of the night sometimes and put a couple of cups down my upper trap for just like a minute or two, and like go back to sleep and get up without a headache in the morning, because before that would have been a headache for sure. But continuing to experiment and play with those things is, I think, is really important. Definitely, I would say these days, there's a huge press towards cold, right? Is this like massive, like, and I think saunas are very cool right now. So cool that you have to have your own at your house. You can't go use one that someone else uses. That everyone needs one in their yard, and then a bucket that just has cold water in it that you get in, or a freezer, and that sort of stuff. And you're like, great. I mean, if you're seeing positive change from that water therapy, and it feels really effective, awesome. But if that becomes like, I do this at the end of every day's training session, I suspect that your body will accommodate to that, and the stimulus that it's yielded in those first days or weeks that you used it will start to become less and less and less. And your body will just, it's not going to reveal other pieces that some of the other practices will. And so, great. If you love that sort of stuff, fantastic. But also, do try and learn new things.
Based off of what Jesse was saying, like I said, if you really look at the system and pay attention to it, it's all in there. Constantly varied again. You got to try new things. What do we say? We have so many exercises that it's hard for glaring weakness to build. It can't, because we have enough variation. We can find a problem, right? Use those same principles. Use all the principles that you believe in training for your therapy. There is no difference. It's just you're doing the same exact thing in therapy that you are doing in your training. You're just doing it on a more minute level and more detailed for a specific area. But for all the coaches out there, there's one component that, we don't always talk about. And that is, it is part of your job is to communicate and teach your athletes how they communicate issues with their body to you and what you expect out of that communication. And there's also the component of, I lay out certain things. Like when I tell people, like, hey, they tell me they have an irritation, an injury, I'm going to say, okay, look, here's a couple things we can try. Here's the positive pros and cons and of each one of these, and sometimes where I find things that work or don't work. But one of the things I'll tell them is, there's a very simple rule that we have. One, we want to retain range of motion as soon as possible, or keep the range of motion. Two, we want to get blood flow in the area as often as possible so that it can bring nutrients and hydration to the area, so the tissue glides really well. But if we try a movement for therapy, if you feel the same while you're doing that movement, or you feel better as the movement is going on, as the repetitions are going by, keep that movement in. If you feel like you're getting tighter or a sharper pain, stop immediately. So for us, a lot of times people, like I'd go to a specialist when I was younger, and they'd say, okay, I don't want you to do any shoulder movements. Okay, well, I'm into training, so like I can't really do that. Like, what should I do and what should I avoid? I just don't want you to do anything upper body for the next 6 weeks. No. What it is this. Yeah. For me, like I might do like a front arm raise, and I might say, okay, when I get at a 45-degree angle, I feel a pinch in the front of my shoulder. Okay, so everything below that pinch, I can load. Anything from that pinch on up, I cannot load that. Okay, so if I do a movement for rehab, and as those reps are going on, it feels the same as when I started, I'll keep that movement in and see how it works out, how I feel the next day or so. If I feel that the symptoms are relieving themselves as I'm going, I definitely found something that's going to help me. If, like I said, it gets tighter or more painful, stop immediately. That is not the movement for you, okay? But as for coaches out there, learn. Your facility, your training, you're an educator. Your job is to educate, not just give someone the fix, also educate them on why that was a fix, why that made an improvement. This way, when someone's with you for an extended period of time, they start to learn things and they start to head stuff off of the past. So they come in and go, hey, I think I might need something for this body part because this is kind of feeling like my hips starting to feel the way my shoulder was. And so do you think we should, what do you think we should do with it? They will start to bring it to you because there's an expectation that they know that you can help fix it. Or if you don't know it, you'll send them to someone who will. But you start to open with that, keep an open line of communication. But people aren't going to realize that, like you said, you have a high level athlete who's like, well, I don't want to come across as a complainer because I really thrilled Chris is working with me. I don't want to ruin that. You don't want that issue. Set the expectations from the beginning. Explain, your thought process and what you want out of them and what they need to inform you about. And that can hopefully help you avoid some issues.
Leave her there.
Cool.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's good.
To wrap that up, I guess I would say we're not telling you what to do. We're not telling you the only way to do it. We're just maybe giving you a couple things to think about and talk amongst yourselves or your friends. If you have questions on any of these things, feel free to reach out to us. Shoot us a DM. Instagram's probably the best. Otherwise, for more content, you can have a look at us on our Instagram pages. All of us are posting different things on those places. And if you have questions, things you'd like to hear us talk about, post to comments on the YouTubes, and we'll see it there. Otherwise, we are going to leave episode 16 there. We'll see you on episode 17.
Conjugate Nation Podcast.